Martha Henley's hands shook as she stacked another log against the crumbling wall, mud sliding between her weathered fingers. The laughter echoed from the road, 3 women pointing, whispering. She didn't turn. She'd heard it all before. Crazy widow, living in that heap, thinks sticks will hold up walls. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that every piece of firewood she pressed into those gaps carried a number, carved so small you'd miss it if you blinked. 23 years of secrets, hidden in plain sight. And when they finally understood what she'd been building all along, their laughter would die in their throats. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Stay with me until the very end. This is a journey you won't want to miss. And comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far Martha's story has traveled. Now, let's dive into. The August heat pressed down on Timber Creek like a punishment. Martha Henley stood in front of what the townspeople generously called her home, a sagging structure with walls so thin you could see daylight through the gaps, a roof that leaked in 3 places, and a door that hadn't closed properly in 5 years. She was 47 years old, looked 60, and felt about 90. "You planning to freeze to death this winter? Or are you going to do it before then?" Martha turned. Ezra Coleman stood at her property line, arms crossed, his face twisted in that particular expression of contempt he'd perfected over the years. He owned the feed store in town, which meant he owned just about everyone's livelihoods, which meant he thought he owned their dignity too. "I'll manage, Ezra. Same as always." "That's not managing. That's barely surviving." He spat into the dirt. "My wife says you've been taking firewood from behind the church again." "Reverend Carson said I could have it." "Reverend Carson's too soft. That wood's for people who contribute to this town, not for—" He stopped himself, but Martha knew what he'd been about to say. "Not for your kind." She turned back to her wall without another word. She'd learned years ago that responding to Ezra Coleman was like throwing water on a grease fire. When his footsteps finally faded, Martha returned to her work. The log in her hands was smooth, oak, about 2 feet long. She examined it carefully, running her fingers along the grain, then pulled out the small knife she kept in her apron pocket. With practiced precision, she carved a number into the end. 847. "Mrs. Henley?" The voice startled her. She dropped the log, spinning around. A young woman stood there, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that held more exhaustion than someone her age should carry. "I'm Sarah Brennan. I heard in town that you might need help." Martha studied her carefully. "Who told you that?" "Reverend Carson. He said you've been working yourself to the bone on this place, and Sarah's voice faltered. "I need a place to stay, just temporarily. I can work. I'm strong. I can help with whatever you're building here." "I'm not building anything." "Then what are all these logs for?" Martha's jaw tightened. "Storage." "Storage." Sarah's eyes moved across the property. The hundreds of logs stacked against the walls, arranged in strange patterns, some vertical, some horizontal, all fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. "That's a lot of storage for someone who barely has walls." "I didn't ask for your opinion." "No, you didn't." Sarah squared her shoulders. "But I'm asking for a chance. 1 week. Let me prove I can help. I'll sleep in the barn. I'll work for just food. And if you don't want me here after 7 days, I'll leave." Martha should have said no. Should have sent this girl back to wherever she'd come from. But something in Sarah's eyes, that desperate, hollow look, reminded Martha of herself 23 years ago. "Fine. 1 week. But you don't touch my firewood. You don't ask questions about it. and you don't tell anyone in town what you see here. Understood?"
"Understood."
That night, Martha lay awake in her corner of the single room that served as bedroom, kitchen, and living space. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see Sarah in the barn, wrapped in an old blanket, shivering despite the summer heat. The girl was running from something. That much was clear. But then again, weren't they all? By dawn, Sarah was already up, hauling water from the well. Martha found her trying to patch one of the larger holes in the wall with mud and straw. "Stop that!" Sarah froze. "I know what you thought, but that's not how we fix these walls." Martha pulled another log from her pile, 848, and positioned it carefully in the gap Sarah had been working on. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for exactly this spot. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "Why are you using firewood as building material? Won't you need it when winter comes?" "I'll manage." "But I said I'll manage." Martha's voice was sharp enough to cut. "You want to help? Go into town and get us some supplies. Here's a list." She handed over a piece of paper. "Take the wagon." Sarah looked at the list, then at Martha. "This is a lot of mails. And rope. Are you sure? Did I ask if you could read?" The girl's face flushed red. She took the list and left without another word. The moment Sarah disappeared down the road, Martha went to work. She moved quickly now, pulling log after log from her carefully organized stacks, checking the numbers, positioning them with precision that came from years of practice. Each piece had its place. Each number had its meaning. And soon, very soon, everyone would understand. When Sarah returned 3 hours later, loaded down with supplies, she found Martha hammering the last piece into place on the eastern wall. "Mrs. Henley, the woman at the general store, Mrs. Patterson, she said—" Sarah stopped, staring at the wall. "What did you do?" The wall was different now. Still patchy, still showing gaps, but the pattern had changed. The logs formed something. Sarah stepped closer, tilting her head. "Is that a map?" "No," Martha's voice was flat. "It's nothing. Did you get the rope?" "Yes, but Mrs. Patterson said something about you. She said you've been collecting firewood for years, that people think you're mad, that you talk to the logs like they're—" "People talk. That's what they do in small towns. They talk because they're bored and their own lives aren't interesting enough to keep them occupied. She said your husband died." Martha's hand stilled on the hammer. 23 years ago. She said there was a fire, that you were the only one who survived. Is there a point to this conversation, or are you just sharing town gossip? Sarah's voice softened. She said you've never been the same since, that you started collecting these logs right after it happened, that you carved numbers into them. Martha turned slowly. "You've been looking at my logs." "I wasn't prying, I just—" "Get out." "What?" "I said get out. Pack your things. You're leaving." "But you said I had a week." "And now you have 10 minutes. Go." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have listened to town gossip. But Mrs. Henley, I need this place. I need somewhere safe to stay. Please." Safe from what? The question hung in the air. Sarah's hands were trembling now, and Martha noticed for the first time the bruise on her wrist, barely visible under her sleeve. "My husband," Sarah whispered. "Thomas Brennan. He owns the lumber mill 3 towns over. Everyone thinks he's a good man, a respectable businessman. But when the doors close and it's just the two of us—" She couldn't finish. Martha felt something crack inside her chest. She remembered being young, remembered being trapped, remembered the fire. "You can stay," she said quietly, "but the rules don't change. You don't talk about my work. Not to anyone. I won't. I promise. That evening, they sat outside as the sun set, eating bread and cheese in silence. Finally, Sarah spoke. The numbers on the logs. They're dates, aren't they? Martha didn't answer. Days since something happened? Still nothing. Mrs. Henley, I won't tell anyone, but I want to understand. Martha stood, walked to the nearest stack of logs, and pulled one out. The number carved into it read 1. She held it up. This was the first day, she said. The day after the fire. The day after I lost everything. My husband, my home, my life. She set it down and pulled out another. 365. This was the first anniversary. The day I decided I wasn't going to let this town forget what happened. Another log. 847. Today. Forget what happened. I don't understand. The fire that killed my husband? It wasn't an accident. Martha's voice was steady now, cold as river stones. Someone said it, and for 23 years I've been marking each day, waiting for the moment when I'd have enough evidence to prove it. Sarah's breath caught. Evidence? In the firewood? Not in it. On it. Every log represents a day I've survived, a day I've waited, a day I've gotten closer to the truth. And the pattern they make when they're all in place? That's going to tell the whole story. But how? They're just logs with numbers. Look closer. Sarah stood, moving to the wall where Martha had been working. In the fading light, she could see it now. The numbers, when arranged in order, formed coordinates. And between the logs, in the gaps, Martha had been carving words. Tiny, precise words that told a story. Ezra Coleman. Barn meeting. $200. Property deed. Murder for hire. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God! Now you understand why you can't tell anyone what you see here. But if you have evidence, why haven't you gone to the sheriff? Martha laughed, bitter and sharp. The sheriff? Ezra Coleman's brother-in-law? The man who's been getting kickbacks from Coleman's feed store for 2 decades? You think he's going to help me? Then what's your plan? To finish what I started. To make this wall so obvious, so impossible to ignore, that when the truth finally comes out, everyone in this town will have to face what they've been pretending not to see for 23 years. Sarah sank down onto the ground, her mind racing. How did you find out? About Ezra Coleman? I didn't. Not at first. For years, I thought it really was just an accident. But then I started paying attention. Started listening to the things people said when they thought I wasn't listening. Started noticing the patterns. Martha sat down beside her. My husband owned land, good land, right on the river. Worth a fortune if you knew how to use it. 2 weeks before the fire, Ezra Coleman made an offer. My husband refused. 1 week later, Ezra came back with a higher offer. My husband refused again. 3 days after that, our house burned down with him inside it. But couldn't that still be coincidence? It could have been, except that 6 months later, Ezra Coleman filed a claim on the land, saying my husband had agreed to sell it to him before he died. He had paperwork, signatures, witnesses. All fake, but who was going to believe a grieving widow over the most powerful man in town? So you lost everything. Not everything. Martha's eyes glinted in the darkness. I kept this piece of land, this worthless, pathetic piece of property that nobody wanted. And I've been building my case ever since. The next morning, Sarah woke to find Martha already working, adding more logs to the wall. But this time, Sarah could see the pattern clearly. Each number, each word, each carefully placed piece of wood was part of a massive timeline that was slowly taking shape across the entire exterior of the hut. "How many more do you need?" Sarah asked. 368. Then it'll be complete. 24 years. The statute of limitations for murder in this state. And then what? Then I take this wall apart, piece by piece, and I deliver it to the federal prosecutor in Helena. Because Ezra Coleman might own the local sheriff, but he doesn't own the federal government. Sarah picked up a log, examining the number. "Let me help you." "I told you, I know what you told me, but Mrs. Henley, I came here running from a man who everyone thinks is respectable, who everyone thinks is good. I know what it's like to have the truth and have nobody believe you. So let me help. Please." Martha studied the girl for a long moment. Then she handed her the knife. "Log 848. Carve it. Carefully." They worked together through the morning, through the afternoon, through the weeks that followed. And as the wall grew, so did Sarah's understanding of what Martha had sacrificed. 23 years of her life, living in poverty, accepting mockery, enduring isolation, all to build this monument to truth. But Ezra Coleman was watching, and he was getting nervous. It was Sarah who noticed him first, standing at the property line one evening, his eyes fixed on the wall. "Mrs. Henley," she whispered. "He's here." Martha didn't even look up from her work. "I know." Ezra walked closer, his boots crunching on the dry grass. "Getting mighty ambitious with your little woodpile, aren't you, Martha?" "It's my property. I'll do what I want with it." "People are starting to talk, saying you've been acting stranger than usual, saying you've got that Brennan girl working for you now, Thomas Brennan's wife." Sarah stiffened. "That's right," Ezra continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard about your situation, Mrs. Brennan. Terrible thing, a husband losing his temper like that. But then again, maybe if you'd been a better wife—" "Get off my property," Martha said, her voice like steel. "Or what? You'll hit me with one of your precious logs?" Ezra laughed. "You know what I think? I think you finally lost what little sense you had left. I think it's time someone petitioned the court to have you declared incompetent. Have you put somewhere where you can't embarrass yourself anymore?" "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. Give it 2 weeks. I'll have the paperwork filed. This land will go to auction to pay for your care, and you'll buy it for pennies on the dollar, just like you did with my husband's land." Ezra's smile froze. "What did you say?" "You heard me." "You've been listening to too many of your own crazy stories, Martha. Your husband sold me that land fair and square." "My husband's signature was forged. The witnesses were paid off. And you know what the really interesting thing is, Ezra? I've spent 23 years proving it." He took a step closer, his face darkening. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" Martha gestured to the wall. "Every log here represents a piece of evidence. Every number, a connection. Every word, a testimony. I've been collecting statements from people on their deathbeds, Ezra. People who aren't afraid of you anymore, because they're already dying. People who are ready to tell the truth about what you did." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Then why are you here? Why are you threatening to have me institutionalized? If I'm just a crazy widow with a pile of firewood, why do you care?" Ezra's jaw worked, his hands clenching into fists. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're nobody. You're nothing." "Maybe, but in 368 days, that won't matter anymore, because the evidence will speak for itself." He stared at her for a long moment, then at Sarah, then back at the wall. "This isn't over." "No," Martha agreed. "It's not. But it will be soon." After he left, Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the knife. "He's going to do something.
He's going to try to stop you.
I know.
Then we have to work faster. We have to...
No. We work at the pace we've been working. Careful. Precise. Because if we rush, we make mistakes. And mistakes are what he's counting on. But that night, as Martha lay in the darkness, she heard something that made her blood run cold.
Footsteps. Outside. Circling the property. She rose quietly, grabbed the rifle she kept by the door, and slipped outside. The moon was bright enough to see by, and what she saw made her heart stop. Someone had been pulling logs from the stacks. Not many, just enough that she might not notice right away. But Martha noticed. She noticed everything. "Who's there?" she called out, raising the rifle. Silence. Then, from the shadows near the barn, "Please don't shoot." Sarah emerged, her arms full of logs. "I was just stealing my evidence?" "No, I was protecting it. I thought if I moved some of the most important pieces to a safer location, buried them somewhere Ezra couldn't find them." "You thought wrong." Martha's voice was ice. "Put them back. Now." "But every log has a place, Sarah. Every single one. You move them, you break the pattern. You destroy what I've spent 2 decades building. Do you understand?" Sarah's face crumpled. "I was trying to help." "Then trust me."
Trust the system. Don't try to fix things that aren't broken. They stood there in the moonlight, the tension thick between them, until finally Sarah nodded and began replacing the logs exactly where they'd been. But the damage had been done, not to the physical evidence, that was intact, but to the trust between them. And in the fight that was coming, trust was the only thing that mattered. The next day brought unexpected visitors. Federal marshals. 2 of them, dressed in dark suits, riding horses that looked too expensive for frontier law enforcement. "Mrs. Henley?" the taller one said, dismounting. "I'm Marshal Raymond Tucker. This is Marshal James Morrison. We received a complaint about the structural integrity of your property. Mind if we take a look?" Martha's stomach dropped. "Who filed the complaint?" "That's confidential, ma'am." "It was Ezra Coleman." Marshal Tucker's expression didn't change.
"We're just here to assess whether this structure poses a danger to you or to others."
They walked around the property, examining the walls, making notes. Sarah stood frozen, watching them, while Martha forced herself to remain calm. "Mrs. Henley," Marshal Morrison said finally, "I'm going to be honest with you. This building isn't safe. The walls are unstable, the roof is compromised, and you're using firewood as structural support. We're going to have to condemn it." "No." "Ma'am, I said no. This is my property, my home. You can't." "We can, and we are. You have 72 hours to vacate. After that, we'll be forced to tear it down." "Tear it down?" Martha's voice rose. "You can't tear it down. That wall. There's evidence on that wall."
"Evidence of what?" She stopped herself just in time. If she told them now, without all the pieces in place, they'd think she was insane. They'd dismiss her. Ezra would win.
"Nothing," she said quietly. "Never mind."
After the marshals left, Sarah grabbed Martha's arm.
"We have to photograph it. Document everything before they come back. We can rebuild the pattern somewhere else." "It won't work. The wall has to be intact. The logs have to be in sequence. If we dismantle it, if we try to recreate it, any halfway decent lawyer will argue we tampered with the evidence." "Then what do we do?"
Martha looked at the wall. Her life's work, 23 years of patient, meticulous research, and felt something inside her finally break.
"I don't know," she whispered. "For the first time in 23 years, I don't know."
Sarah's voice cut through the silence like a blade.
Then we make them see it before they tear it down." Martha turned, her eyes hollow. "What?" "The marshals gave us 72 hours. We use every single one of them. We invite people here. We make them look at this wall before it's gone." "Nobody will come. Ezra Coleman owns this town." "Not everyone." Sarah's jaw set in a way Martha hadn't seen before. "Reverend Carson will come. He's the one who sent me here, remember? He knows something's wrong in this town, even if he won't say it out loud. One preacher against Ezra Coleman. That's your plan? It's better than giving up." Martha wanted to argue, but the fire in Sarah's eyes stopped her. This girl, this broken, bruised girl who'd shown up at her property less than a month ago, had more fight left in her than Martha had felt in years. "Fine, go get him. But if this backfires, it won't." Sarah was already moving toward the wagon. "Trust me." The words hung in the air long after Sarah disappeared down the road. Trust. The thing Martha had stopped giving anyone 23 years ago. An hour passed. Then 2. Martha worked on the wall, her hands moving automatically, carving numbers she could probably write in her sleep at this point. 849, 850, 851. Each one brought her closer to completion and further from having time to finish. When the wagon finally rattled back into view, it wasn't just Reverend Carson sitting beside Sarah. There were 4 other people crammed in the back. Mrs. Patterson from the general store, old Henry Whitmore, who ran the livery, Dorothy Chen from the boarding house, and someone Martha didn't recognize at first. Then she saw the cane, the slight limp, and her breath caught. Thomas Brennan, Sarah's husband. "What the hell is this?" Martha hissed as Sarah jumped down. "I had to," Sarah whispered back. "He was in town. He saw me with the Reverend. If I'd run, he would have made a scene, and then everyone would know I'm hiding here. So you brought him to my property?" "Mrs. Henley." Thomas Brennan's voice was smooth, cultured, nothing like the monster Sarah had described. He approached with his hand extended, smiling. "I've heard so much about your project here."
My wife has been most enthusiastic in her letters. Martha didn't take his hand. "Letters?" "Oh yes, Sarah writes me every week, don't you, darling? Tells me all about the work she's been doing, helping you with your little construction project." Sarah's face had gone white. "Thomas, It's quite all right, dear. I understand you needed some time away, some space to think." His smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold as January ice. "I'm just here to check on your progress, make sure you're taking proper care of yourself." "She's fine," Martha said flatly. "You can leave now." "Actually, I think I'll stay. My wife has been telling me such interesting stories about your wall, about the numbers, the patterns. I'm something of an amateur historian myself, and I find frontier preservation fascinating." Reverend Carson cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all take a look at what Mrs. Henley has been working on. Sarah said it was quite remarkable." Martha shot Sarah a look that could strip paint, but the damage was done. Thomas Brennan was here, and he was watching Sarah like a hawk watches a mouse. "This way," Martha said, leading them to the eastern wall where the evidence was clearest. Mrs. Patterson gasped when she saw it up close. "My Lord, Martha, these are dates and names. Is that Ezra Coleman's name?" "Among others." Henry Whitmore leaned in, squinting at the tiny words carved between the logs. "This says barn meeting and $200. What does that mean?" "It means," Martha said carefully, "that 23 years ago, a man paid $200 to have my husband killed so he could steal his land." The silence that followed was absolute. "That's quite an accusation," Thomas Brennan said softly.
Do you have proof? You're looking at it. Firewood with numbers carved into it? Any prosecutor would laugh you out of court. Not when they see the whole pattern.
Not when they read every testimony, every connection, every piece of evidence I've collected over 2 decades. Evidence from dying people, Thomas said, his voice still pleasant. Convenient, that. Dead men tell no tales, but apparently dying ones do. How does anyone verify what you claim they told you? Because I wrote it all down, dated, witnessed, notarized where I could. By who? The local notary who probably takes his orders from the same Ezra Coleman you're accusing? Martha's hands clenched. This man was too smart, too quick. And the way he was looking at Sarah, casual, possessive, like she was a belonging he'd temporarily misplaced, made Martha's skin crawl. Look, Reverend Carson interjected. Whatever the truth is, Mrs. Henley has clearly put extraordinary effort into this. If she says she has evidence, perhaps we should at least examine it before the marshals tear it down. That's why you brought them here? Martha stared at Sarah. To examine the evidence? We have 72 hours, and you thought now was the time for a tour? I thought if people saw it, if they understood what you've been building, they might help us fight the condemnation order. Help? Martha's laugh was bitter. These people have ignored me for 23 years. Why would they help me now? Because I was wrong. Mrs. Patterson's voice trembled. I've been wrong about you for so long, Martha. We all have. We thought you were crazy, collecting firewood, talking to yourself, living in this falling-down shack. But you weren't crazy. You were working. And if even half of what's written on this wall is true, it's all true. Then Ezra Coleman is a murderer, and we've been helping him by looking the other way. Henry Whitmore cleared his throat. Margaret's right. I remember when your husband died, Martha. I remember Ezra showing up at the land office not 3 months later with papers saying he owned your property. I thought it was strange then. I should have said something. Why didn't you? Martha asked quietly. Because I was scared. Because Ezra controlled my business. Because I had a family to feed, and standing up to him meant losing everything. And now? Now I'm 74 years old, my children are grown, and I'm tired of being scared. Dorothy Chen stepped forward. My father knew your husband. He worked on his land before the fire. He told me, made me promise never to repeat this, but he said he saw Ezra Coleman's ranch hand near your property the night of the fire. Saw him carrying lamp oil. Martha felt the world tilt. What was the ranch hand's name? Robert Finch. Finch. Martha moved to a different section of the wall, running her fingers over the logs until she found the one she wanted. Log 1247. Carved beneath the number, Robert Finch. Died September 1869. Deathbed confession, witnessed by Dr. Samuel Hayes. He confessed? Dorothy breathed. On his deathbed. Told the doctor everything. How Ezra paid him $50 to set the fire. How he was supposed to make sure I was out of the house, but my husband was inside. How Ezra promised no one would ever find out. Where's Dr. Hayes now? Dead, 10 years ago. But he wrote it all down, signed it. I have the document buried in the safe place. Thomas Brennan had been silent through all of this, but now he spoke. This is all very moving, but it doesn't change the fact that the marshals are coming to tear this place down in less than 3 days. Even if everything Mrs. Henley says is true, she needs time to present her case properly. Time she doesn't have. Unless we stop them, Sarah said. Her husband's head turned slowly toward her. Excuse me? The marshals. We could stop them. Delay them somehow. How exactly do you propose we do that, darling? The endearment sounded like a threat. Martha saw Sarah flinch, saw her shrink back into herself, and something inside Martha snapped. Get out of here, Brennan. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Get off my property. Your wife is staying. You're leaving. Thomas's pleasant mask finally cracked. My wife goes where I say she goes. Your wife is a grown woman who can make her own choices. Is that so? He turned to Sarah. Well then, Sarah, are you coming home with me, or are you staying here with this delusional old woman and her pile of kindling? Sarah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Martha could see the terror in her eyes, the years of conditioning, the fear that had been beaten into her. She's staying, Martha said. I wasn't asking you. And I wasn't offering you a choice. This is my land. I want you gone. Thomas took a step closer to Martha, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea what you're interfering with, old woman. No idea who you're dealing with.
Don't I? I've spent 23 years dealing with powerful men who think they can do whatever they want because nobody will stop them. You think you scare me? Ezra Coleman murdered my husband and got away with it. You're just another bully with money. Now get out before I get my rifle. For a moment, Thomas looked like he might hit her. His hand actually rose, fingers curling into a fist. But then he saw the others watching. The Reverend, Mrs. Patterson, Henry, Dorothy, and he lowered it slowly. This isn't over, he said. Then to Sarah, 1 week. That's how long you have to come home. After that, I stop being understanding. Do you hear me? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thomas limped back to his horse, mounted it with difficulty, and rode off without another word. The moment he was gone, Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Martha wanted to comfort her, but didn't know how. Physical affection wasn't something she'd practiced in 2 decades. It was Mrs. Patterson who knelt beside Sarah, who pulled the girl into her arms and held her while she cried. You're safe now, honey. We won't let him take you. You don't understand, Sarah gasped. He owns the lumber mill. He employs half the men in the next county. He'll find a way to hurt all of you if you try to protect me. Let him try, Henry said grimly. I've been letting powerful men push me around my whole life. I'm done. We're all done, Dorothy added. Martha's been fighting alone for 23 years. Maybe it's time the rest of us started fighting too. Reverend Carson nodded. I'll speak to the marshals. See if I can negotiate an extension on the condemnation order. It won't work, Martha said. Ezra's got them in his pocket. Maybe, but I have to try. In the meantime, we need to document everything on this wall. Photograph it, sketch it, write it all down. So even if they tear it down, we have a record. I have a camera, Mrs. Patterson said. My husband left it to me. I never learned how to use it properly, but I know how, Dorothy interrupted. I worked for a photographer before I opened the boarding house. If you'll let me borrow it, I can take pictures of every section. Martha felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the strange sensation of not being completely alone. Do it, she said. Take pictures of everything, every log, every number, every word. And be quick about it. We don't know when Ezra will make his next move. They worked through the afternoon, Dorothy carefully photographing each section of the wall while Mrs. Patterson took notes, transcribing the tiny carved words into a ledger. Henry helped Martha reinforce the weakest sections, and Reverend Carson rode back to town to confront the marshals. Sarah, still shaking from the confrontation with her husband, tried to help, but kept dropping things, her hands trembling too badly to be useful. Sit down, Martha told her. You're no good to anyone like this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have told Thomas about the wall. I thought if I kept writing him letters, kept him believing I was just here temporarily, he wouldn't come looking for me. I never thought.
You thought wrong, but it's done now. No use crying over it.
He's going to tell Ezra Coleman about the wall, about what you're doing.
Martha froze. What?
Before he left, I heard him talking to one of Ezra's ranch hands in town. He said he had information that might be valuable, that Ezra might want to know about the Crazy Widows project.
The unfamiliar hope in Martha's chest died instantly. When?
This morning, before we came here.
So Ezra already knows. Martha's mind raced. Which means he's already planning his next move. As if on cue, Dorothy's camera clattered to the ground.
Oh no.
Everyone turned. Smoke was rising from the direction of town.
Not the normal cook-fire smoke.
This was thick, black, heavy with the smell of burning wood and chemicals.
The church,
Reverend Carson whispered.
That's coming from the church.
They ran to the road, staring at the plume of smoke growing larger by the second. Henry's face went gray.
The church is right next to the town hall, where all the land records are kept.
Martha understood immediately.
He's destroying the evidence, the original deed, the forged signatures, everything that proves he stole my husband's land.
We have to go, Carson said, already moving toward his horse. If we can save even some of those records. It's too late, Martha said flatly. By the time you get there, it'll all be ash. That's the point.
Then what do we do?
We finish what we started. We document this wall, and we get the evidence to someone who can actually do something with it.
Who?
Sarah asked.
Who's going to believe us now that the original records are gone?
Martha pulled out the log marked 1, the first day after the fire. She held it up to the fading light.
I still have the original deed. My husband gave it to me for safekeeping a week before he died. He thought he was being paranoid. Turns out he was right to be scared.
Where is it?
Buried, in a place Ezra Coleman will never find it. And tomorrow morning, I'm digging it up and taking it to Helena myself, to the federal prosecutor, with or without a complete wall. I have enough evidence to put Ezra Coleman on trial for murder.
You can't go alone, Dorothy said.
If Ezra finds out, he already knows everything. Thomas Brennan made sure of that. So I don't have the luxury of waiting anymore. I leave at dawn.
Then I'm coming with you, Sarah said.
No.
Yes, you need someone to watch your back. Someone Ezra won't expect.
Please, Mrs. Henley, let me do this. Let me help you finish what you started.
Martha looked at this girl, terrified, traumatized, but somehow still standing, and saw herself 23 years ago. The version of herself that hadn't given up yet. The version that still believed justice was possible.
All right, she said. We leave at dawn. Pack light. It's a 2-day ride to Helena, and we need to move fast. That night, they slept in shifts, keeping watch for any sign of Ezra's men. Dorothy and Mrs. Patterson stayed, refusing to leave the property unguarded. Henry went back to town to see what he could learn about the fire. When he returned near midnight, his face was grim. It's bad. Church burned to the ground. Town hall took heavy damage. The land office. Everything's gone. Every deed, every record, every piece of documentation for the last 30 years. All ash. Anyone hurt? Reverend Carson asked. No, the fire started after midnight. Nobody was in the buildings. But that's the only good news.
Ezra's already spreading the story. He's saying Martha did it. Revenge for the condemnation order. Half the town believes him.
Martha laughed, cold and hollow.
Of course they do. It's easier to believe the crazy widow finally snapped than to admit their precious Ezra Coleman is a murderer.
There's more, Henry said quietly. The marshals are coming tomorrow. Not in 3 days. Tomorrow morning. Ezra convinced them you're dangerous. They're bringing men to tear down the wall and arrest you for arson." The words fell like stones into still water, rippling out into silence. Sarah stood up. "Then we leave tonight, right now." "We'll never make it in the dark," Martha said. "The road to Helena goes through rough country. We break an axle, or worse." "Then we hide the most important evidence, the logs with the deathbed confession, the ones that directly implicate Ezra. We bury them somewhere safe and—" "No." Martha's voice was absolute. "The wall stays intact.
The evidence stays together. That's the only way this works."
Then what? The answer came to Martha like lightning. "We don't run. We make them come to us. And when they do, we make sure everyone sees exactly what they're destroying." "I don't understand," Sarah said, but Dorothy did. A slow smile spread across her face. "You're going to make them tear down the wall in front of witnesses, in front of everyone, so they can't hide what's written there." "Exactly. By tomorrow morning, I want every person in this town standing on this property, seeing this evidence with their own eyes before the marshals destroy it. We can't stop them from tearing it down, but we can make damn sure everyone knows what they're tearing down and why." Reverend Carson was already nodding. "I'll spread the word. Tell everyone there's going to be a service, a witnessing, for Martha's wall." "They won't come," Mrs. Patterson said. "They're too scared of Ezra."
"Then we make them more scared of living with the truth than they are of Ezra Coleman," Martha said. "Tell them the wall contains evidence of murder. Tell them it names names. Tell them that if they don't come see it tomorrow, they'll be complicit in covering up the truth." "That might work," Henry said slowly. "People in this town, they're cowards, but they're not evil. If they think their silence makes them accomplices—" "Go," Martha ordered. "All of you. Spread the word. Tell everyone to be here at dawn. Tell them this is their last chance to see the truth before it's destroyed forever." They scattered into the night, leaving Martha and Sarah alone with the wall. "Do you think they'll come?" Sarah asked. "I don't know, but it's the only chance we have." They worked through the dark hours, adding the final logs, carving the last numbers. 852, 853, 854. Each one felt like a prayer, a hope, a refusal to let 23 years of work die without being seen. As the first gray light touched the horizon, they heard it. Voices, footsteps, the creaking of wagon wheels. People were coming. Martha counted them as they came. 20 people, then 40, then 60. More than she'd seen gathered in one place since the church picnic of 1868. Back when her husband was still alive and the world made sense. The first to arrive was old Widow Crane, leaning on her grandson's arm. She walked straight to the wall and pressed her hand against it, like she was feeling for a heartbeat. "I remember the night of the fire," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I remember seeing Ezra Coleman riding past my house at midnight, his horse lathered like he'd been riding hard. I told myself it was none of my business. I was wrong." More voices joined hers. The butcher's wife, the school teacher, the man who ran the grain mill, each one stepping forward with their own piece of the puzzle they'd been too scared to share for 23 years. "I saw Ezra's ranch hand buying lamp oil the day before the fire. 5 gallons of it. I thought it was strange, but I didn't ask questions. My husband worked the land office. He said the signatures on the deed transfer looked wrong. Different ink. Different handwriting. He told me to keep quiet or we'd lose everything. I was friends with Robert Finch, the man who set the fire. He was drunk one night and started crying, saying he'd done something terrible for money. I should have pressed him. I should have." "You should have all spoken up years ago," Martha cut in, her voice carrying across the crowd. "But you didn't.
And now we're here." Sarah stood beside her, watching the people with wide eyes. "They're actually coming. They're actually listening. They're listening because they know what's coming. They want to ease their consciences before the evidence disappears." Martha turned back to the wall, running her hand over log 854. "But at least they're here. That's something."
The sun cleared the horizon, painting everything gold and red. And that's when the marshals rode in. 4 of them this time, not 2. They had a wagon with them, loaded with tools, hammers, crowbars, axes. Marshal Tucker dismounted, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Henley, I see you've gathered quite an audience." "Just some neighbors come to pay their respects." "Respects to what? A condemned building?" "To the truth," Martha gestured to the wall. "Before you tear it down, I'm asking you to read it. Really read it. Look at the evidence I've been collecting for 23 years. Ma'am, we're not here to evaluate evidence. We're here to execute a lawful order. An order issued by a corrupt official working for a murderer." The crowd murmured. Tucker's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a factual statement. Ezra Coleman killed my husband to steal his land. He burned down the church and town hall last night to destroy the original records,
And now he's using you to destroy the only remaining evidence of his crime. You have proof the Coleman ordered those fires?"
I have proof he ordered the first one, the one that killed my husband. That's what this wall documents. Every log, every number, every carved word. It's all here." Tucker exchanged glances with his fellow marshals. One of them, the younger one, actually walked closer to the wall, squinting at the tiny carvings. "Sir," he said quietly, "you should see this. We're not here to—" "Sir, please." Tucker dismounted with obvious reluctance and approached the wall. Martha watched his eyes move across the surface, reading the words, following the numbers. His face changed, just slightly, but enough. "This says Robert Finch confessed on his deathbed to murder for hire." "It does." "And you have documentation of this confession?" "I do, signed by the attending physician, Dr. Samuel Hayes." "Who's dead?" "But whose signature can be verified."
I have the original document in a safe location.
Then why haven't you presented this to the authorities before now?
"Because the local authorities work for Ezra Coleman. The sheriff is his brother-in-law. The land office clerk is on his payroll. I had to wait until I had enough evidence that even corruption couldn't bury it." Tucker was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to the crowd. "Did anyone here know Robert Finch?" 3 hands went up. One of them belonged to Harold Sims, who ran the blacksmith shop. "Harold," Tucker said, "did Finch ever say anything to you about the Henley fire?" Harold's face went red. He might have mentioned something, once, when he was drinking." "What did he say?" "He said he'd done a terrible thing for money. Said it kept him up at nights. Said he wished he could take it back." "Did he say what the terrible thing was?" "No. But this was right after the Henley fire. And everyone knew Finch worked for Ezra Coleman, so I assumed."
"You assumed," Tucker repeated,
"But you never reported it." "Who was I going to report it to? The sheriff? Ezra's family? I've got a business to run, Marshal. I've got children to feed. Speaking up against Ezra Coleman is a good way to lose both." The crowd's murmur grew louder. People were nodding, agreeing. The fear that had kept them silent for decades was finally finding a voice. That's when the second wagon arrived. This one was fancier, pulled by matched horses, and when the door opened, Ezra Coleman himself stepped out. The murmuring stopped instantly. Ezra surveyed the crowd with cold eyes, then turned to the marshals.
Gentlemen, I see you're having trouble executing a simple demolition order. Do I need to file a formal complaint with your superiors? No, sir, Tucker said. We were just examining. I don't care what you were examining. I want this structure torn down. Now. Mr.
Coleman, there are allegations here that allegations from a mentally unstable woman who's been a public nuisance for over 2 decades? You're not seriously giving credence to her ravings, are you? I'm giving credence to sworn testimony from a dying man. What dying man? Robert Finch? He was a drunk who died of liver failure. Anything he said in his final days was probably delirium. Dr. Hayes didn't think so. Ezra's expression flickered, just for a second, but Martha saw it, the crack in his armor. Samuel Hayes was a fool, Ezra said, and he's dead, so he can't verify anything. But his signature can be verified, Tucker said slowly. And if it's genuine, if he really did document Finch's confession, then we have a problem, Mr. Coleman. The only problem here is that you're wasting time. Tear down this eyesore and arrest Mrs. Henley for the arson of the church and town hall. I didn't set those fires, Martha said. Of course you did. You had motive. You had opportunity. And you've spent 23 years nursing a grudge against this town. I've spent 23 years documenting your crimes. Is that what you call this? Ezra gestured dismissively at the wall. Firewood with scratches on it? That's your evidence? It's more evidence than you left when you murdered my husband. The crowd gasped. Ezra's face went dark with rage. I didn't murder anyone, you delusional old woman. Your husband died in an accidental fire. I bought the land legally. And if you continue to slander me— Slander requires a false statement, Martha interrupted. Everything I've said is true. You paid Robert Finch $50 to set fire to my home. You made sure my husband was inside. You thought I was gone too. That's why you looked so surprised when you saw me at his funeral. You thought you'd killed us both. Lies. Are they? Martha pulled log number 1 from the wall, holding it up. This is from the day after the fire. The day you came to my husband's grave and whispered, "I'm sorry it had to be this way." I was standing close enough to hear you, close enough to see your face. You weren't sorry he died. You were sorry you had to kill him. Ezra's hand moved to his belt, where Martha knew he kept a pistol. Several men in the crowd noticed and stepped forward, creating a barrier between him and Martha. You can't prove any of this, Ezra said. I can prove all of it. I have Finch's deathbed confession. I have the original deed showing my husband never agreed to sell. I have testimony from a dozen people who saw you acting suspiciously before and after the fire. I have financial records showing you paid Finch $50 the week before my husband died. And I have 23 years of documented lies you've told this town to cover your tracks. Where's this evidence? Hidden in your firewood? Some of it. The rest is buried where you'll never find it. But tomorrow, it'll be in the hands of the federal prosecutor in Helena. Along with photographs of this wall, transcripts of every carved word, and signed testimonies from everyone here who finally found the courage to speak. Ezra looked at the crowd, really looked at them, and Martha saw the moment he understood. His power was based on fear, and fear only works when people are isolated. Together, they were stronger than him. "Marshal Tucker," he said, his voice tight, "are you going to let her stand here and slander me? Or are you going to do your job?" Tucker was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to need to see this documentation Mrs. Henley mentioned. The deathbed confession. The original deed. If they're authentic," "They're authentic," Martha said. "And I'll produce them the moment you promise this wall stays standing long enough for a proper investigation."
I can't make that promise.
I have a court order issued by a judge who takes bribes from Ezra Coleman. That order isn't worth the paper it's written on. That's for a higher authority to decide, not me. Then take it to a higher authority. Send a telegram to Helena. Tell them about the allegations, about the evidence, about the fact that Ezra Coleman is using legal proceedings to destroy evidence of his own crime.
This is ridiculous, Ezra snarled. Marshal, either execute the order or I'll have your badge.
Tucker's expression hardened. You don't have the authority to take my badge, Mr. Coleman. And I'm beginning to think Mrs. Henley might be right about you. The words hung in the air like smoke. The crowd shifted, energized. Someone started to clap, then someone else. Within seconds, half the crowd was applauding, and Ezra Coleman's face had gone purple with rage.
You're all fools, he spat. Every one of you. You think you can stand against me? I own this town. I own your businesses.
I own your futures. You don't own the truth, Widow Crane said, her voice surprisingly strong, and we've been hiding from it too long.
Ezra's hand dropped to his pistol. Old woman, if you... The gun was halfway out of the holster when Sarah stepped forward. Martha tried to grab her, tried to pull her back, but Sarah shook her off and walked straight toward Ezra Coleman. You're just like my husband, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Powerful, respected. Everyone thinks you're a good man, but behind closed doors, you're a monster. And the only reason you've gotten away with it this long is because people like me were too scared to speak.
Who the hell are you?
I'm Sarah Brennan, Thomas Brennan's wife, and I'm standing here with Martha Henley because I know what it's like to live with a lie. I know what it's like to smile and pretend everything's fine while inside you're dying. But I'm done pretending, and so is she, and so are all of them. She gestured to the crowd. So you can threaten us. You can try to destroy this wall. But the truth is already out, Mr. Coleman. It's been carved into these logs for 23 years, and now everyone's seen it. Ezra stared at her, his hand still on his pistol. For a moment, Martha thought he might actually shoot her. But then another voice rang out. She's right, Ezra. It's over. Everyone turned. Thomas Brennan stood at the edge of the crowd, leaning on his cane. But he wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking at Ezra. What are you doing here? Ezra demanded. I came to get my wife, but I heard something interesting on the way. Want to know what it was? I don't give a damn. I heard that you and I are more alike than I thought. Both of us using our power to hurt people weaker than us. Both of us hiding behind respectability while we destroy lives. Thomas's voice was bitter. The difference is, I'm looking at my future standing right here.
A bitter old man who's lost everything because he couldn't stop himself from taking what didn't belong to him. Shut your mouth, Brennan. Why? You going to shoot me too? In front of all these witnesses? Go ahead. Add another murder to the list. Ezra's hand tightened on the pistol grip. The crowd held its collective breath. Marshal Tucker drew his own weapon. Mr. Coleman, take your hand off that gun. Right now. Or what? Or I'll arrest you for threatening a federal marshal in the execution of his duties. I'm not threatening you. You're threatening everyone here. And I'm done pretending I don't see it. Tucker's voice was steel. I don't know if everything Mrs. Henley says is true, but I know you just tried to draw on an unarmed woman, and I know you've been trying to intimidate me since I got here. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your hand off that weapon, mount your wagon, and leave this property. And I'm going to delay this demolition order until I can consult with my superiors about the allegations that have been made. You can't. I can and I am. Now move. For 10 seconds, nobody breathed. Ezra Coleman stood frozen, his hand on his pistol, his face twisted with rage and something else. Fear, maybe.
or the desperate realization that his power was finally failing. Then he let go of the gun, turned on his heel, and stalked back to his wagon without another word. But as he climbed in, he looked back at Martha one last time. "This isn't over," he said. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, friends in high places. And when they're done with you, you'll wish you'd burned with your husband." The wagon rolled away, leaving a silence so thick you could cut it. Martha's legs suddenly felt weak. She sat down hard on the ground, her 23 years of single-minded purpose finally catching up with her. Sarah knelt beside her.
Are you all right?
I don't know. Ask me in a week.
You did it. You actually did it.
We did it, all of us.
Martha looked at the crowd, these people who'd ignored her for decades, who were finally standing with her.
Thank you, all of you, for finding your courage.
We should be thanking you, Mrs. Patterson said, for never giving up, for showing us what real strength looks like. Marshal Tucker approached, his weapon back in its holster. "Mrs. Henley, I need to see that documentation you mentioned. The confession, the original deed, everything."
"I'll get it, but it's buried. It'll take time to dig up."
"How long?"
2 hours, maybe 3.
"I'll wait, and I'll post guards on this property to make sure nothing happens to this wall before we can properly investigate."
Thank you, Marshal.
"Don't thank me yet. If your evidence doesn't hold up..."
"It will."
"Then we have a long road ahead."
Murder trials aren't simple, especially when the accused has money and influence.
"I know, but at least the road's finally open." Tucker nodded and moved away to organize his men. Martha stood slowly, her joints protesting, and walked to the wall one more time. She pressed her palm against log 854, feeling the rough wood beneath her fingers. "Funny thing," she said to Sarah. "I thought when this moment came, I'd feel triumphant, victorious. But mostly, I just feel tired." "That's because you've been carrying this weight alone for so long. Now you can finally put it down." "Can I? Even if Ezra Coleman goes to prison, even if justice is served, it won't bring my husband back." "No, but it'll mean he didn't die for nothing. It'll mean you turned your grief into something that matters." Martha looked at this young woman, this broken, brave soul who'd stumbled into her life and somehow become the daughter she'd never had. "What are you going to do?" Martha asked. "About Thomas?" Sarah's expression hardened. "I heard what he said, about seeing his future in Ezra Coleman. Maybe that means he'll change. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, I'm not going back to him. Not now, not ever. He'll come for you. Let him try. I'm not scared anymore. You taught me that. You've been fighting a powerful man for 23 years. I can fight mine for however long it takes. You can stay here. Help me rebuild after this is over." "Rebuild what? The house?" "The life. The future. Everything I put on hold when my husband died." Martha smiled, thin but genuine. "I've spent 23 years living in the past. Maybe it's time I tried living in the present." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted near the road. People were shouting, pointing. Martha turned to see another wagon approaching, but this one was different. Official. The seal on its side marked it as federal property. A man stepped down, tall and gray-haired, wearing a suit that looked expensive even from a distance. He walked straight to Marshal Tucker, showed him some kind of credentials, and the two men spoke in low, urgent voices. Then they both turned and looked at Martha. The gray-haired man approached, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Martha Henley?" "That's me." "I'm Inspector General William Crawford.
I've been investigating irregularities in the Montana Territory Land Office for the past 6 months. Yesterday, I received an anonymous telegram suggesting I come to Timber Creek immediately. The telegram said I'd find evidence of fraud, corruption, and murder. Was that you? Martha's mind raced. No, I didn't send any telegram. Then who? I did. Thomas Brennan stepped forward again, his cane clicking on the hard ground. Last night, after I left here, I sent a telegram to every federal office I could think of, telling them about Martha's wall, about the evidence, about everything. Sarah stared at her husband. Why? Because, Thomas's voice broke, because I looked at Ezra Coleman and saw myself in 20 years, powerful, cruel, alone. And I thought about you standing up to him, standing up to me, and I realized I had a choice. I could keep being the man I've been, or I could try to be someone different, someone better. He looked at Martha. I don't expect forgiveness from either of you, but I wanted to do one thing right before I lose everything that matters. Inspector Crawford was already moving toward the wall, his eyes scanning the carved words with sharp intelligence. This is extraordinary. How long have you been documenting this? 23 years, Martha said. Every day, every piece of evidence, every connection. And you have the original documentation? The deathbed confession? I do. Buried on this property. I'll retrieve it now. Please do. And Mrs. Henley? Crawford's expression softened slightly. If half of what's written here is true, you may have just exposed one of the largest land fraud operations in territorial history. Ezra Coleman isn't the only name on this wall. Martha's breath caught. What? There are connections here to the territorial governor's office, to land speculators in San Francisco, to railroad companies buying right-of-ways through fraudulent deeds. He turned to his assistant. Send telegrams to Helena, to San Francisco, to Washington. Tell them we need federal marshals, prosecutors, and forensic accountants. This is bigger than one murder. This is systematic corruption. The crowd erupted in excited whispers. Martha felt dizzy. She'd been so focused on proving Ezra Coleman killed her husband that she hadn't fully considered what else the evidence might reveal. Sarah, she said quietly, help me dig up those documents. They walked together to the back of the property, to the old oak tree where Martha had buried her most precious evidence in a waterproof box all those years ago. As they started digging, Sarah said, Are you ready for this? For everything that's about to happen? Martha's hands closed around the shovel. I've been ready for 23 years. The question is whether the rest of the world is ready for the truth. They dug in silence for a while, the sounds of the crowd fading behind them. When they finally hit the box, Martha's hands were shaking so hard she could barely open it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was everything she'd been protecting. The original deed with her husband's signature. Dr. Hayes's documentation of Finch's confession. Letters, receipts, photographs. A quarter-century of evidence, preserved and waiting for this exact moment. Let's finish this, Martha said, lifting the box. They walked back together. Two women who'd found each other in their darkest moments, carrying the weight of truth between them. And as Inspector Crawford opened the box and began examining the contents, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock to grim determination, Martha knew that the real story was just beginning. Crawford's hands moved through the documents with the precision of a surgeon, laying each piece out on the makeshift table someone had assembled from old boards. His assistant scribbled notes furiously, his pen scratching across paper like claws on wood. This is authenticated, Crawford said, holding up Dr. Hayes's statement. The notary seal is genuine. The signature matches samples I have on file from Hayes's medical practice. And the level of detail. He shook his head slowly. Robert Finch didn't just confess to setting the fire. He named everyone involved in the conspiracy. The lawyer who forged the deed, the land office clerk who filed it, the witness who perjured himself, even the judge who validated the transfer. "Judge Thornton," Martha said. "He died 5 years ago." Convenient, but 3 of the other men are still alive, still working, still benefiting from crimes they committed 23 years ago. Crawford looked up at Marshal Tucker. "I need those men arrested immediately, before word of this spreads and they have time to run." "I'll need warrants." "You'll have them within the hour. My authority supersedes local jurisdiction in cases of federal land fraud." Crawford turned back to Martha. "Mrs. Henley, did you know your husband's land contained mineral rights?" "Mineral rights? No, we just farmed it." "Well, someone knew. According to these surveyor reports," he held up a yellowed document, "there's a significant copper deposit running beneath your former property, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Ezra Coleman didn't just want your land. He wanted what was under it."
The crowd's murmur turned into an uproar. Copper! The word spread like wildfire, and Martha felt her knees weaken again. Her husband had died for copper he didn't even know existed.
"There's more," Crawford continued. "These financial records show Coleman wasn't working alone. He had partners, investors from San Francisco, who provided capital in exchange for shares in the mining operation. And look at this signature." He pointed to a document. "Territorial Governor Potts. He authorized the mining permit 3 weeks after Coleman acquired the land." "The governor's involved?" Tucker looked sick. "Up to his neck. And if the governor's dirty, we have to assume the corruption goes even higher." Crawford's jaw set. "This is why I was sent here. Washington's been hearing rumors about land fraud in Montana Territory for years, but every investigation got buried. Now I know why. The people doing the investigating were on Coleman's payroll." Sarah spoke up, her voice shaking.
What does this mean for Martha?
"It means Mrs. Henley didn't just document a murder. She documented a criminal enterprise that's been operating for over 2 decades, involving some of the most powerful men in the territory." Crawford looked at Martha with something approaching awe. "You've been building a case against people who thought they were untouchable." "I was just trying to prove my husband didn't die in an accident." "You did that and so much more. But Mrs. Henley, I need you to understand something. These people, Coleman, his partners, the governor, they're not going to accept defeat quietly. When word gets out that you've exposed them, they're going to come after you with everything they have. Legal attacks, character assassination, maybe worse." "Let them come. I've been waiting 23 years. "Martha!" It was Reverend Carson, pushing through the crowd. "You need to leave, now. Take Sarah and go somewhere safe. These men have too much to lose." "I'm not running. It's not running. It's surviving long enough to see justice done." Before Martha could respond, the sound of hoofbeats thundered up the road. 6 riders, moving fast. They pulled up hard, horses snorting and stamping, and the lead rider dismounted with aggressive purpose. It was Sheriff Coleman, Ezra's brother-in-law. "Inspector Crawford," the sheriff said, his voice tight, "I need you to step away from that evidence." "On what authority?" "On the authority of a warrant sworn out by Ezra Coleman against Martha Henley for criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and arson. I'm here to arrest her and seize any materials related to her alleged crimes." Crawford didn't move. "Your warrant has no standing here. This is a federal investigation." "Federal or not, I'm the law in this county, and I have a valid warrant signed by Judge Morrison."
Judge Morrison, who received a $5,000 contribution to his re-election campaign from Ezra Coleman last year? That Judge Morrison? The sheriff's face flushed.
You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I also know you're about to interfere with a federal officer in the performance of his duties, which carries a minimum sentence of 5 years in federal prison. So I suggest you and your men turn around and leave. Now. I'm not leaving without Martha Henley. Then you're not leaving. Crawford gestured to Marshal Tucker. Arrest him. What? The sheriff's hand dropped to his gun. You can't. Interference with a federal investigation, attempted obstruction of justice. And if you draw that weapon, I'll add assault on a federal officer. Tucker's own gun was already out, pointed steady at the sheriff's chest. Your choice. For a moment, Martha thought there would be gunfire. The sheriff's men were reaching for their weapons. Tucker's marshals were forming a line, and the crowd was scrambling backward to get out of the crossfire. Then Thomas Brennan stepped between them. Sheriff Coleman, he said quietly, look around. You have 6 men. The federal marshals have 4. But there are 80 citizens here who just heard Inspector Crawford explain how your family has been running a criminal conspiracy for 2 decades. You really think you're walking away from this with Martha Henley in chains? Stay out of this, Brennan. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us. Every person here who's been living under Ezra Coleman's thumb, too scared to speak up, too beaten down to fight back. Well, we're done being scared. You want Martha? You'll have to go through every single one of us. The crowd surged forward. Not aggressive, not violent, just there. A wall of human bodies between the sheriff and Martha. Old Widow Crane, Henry Whitmore, Mrs. Patterson, Dorothy Chen. Even people Martha didn't know, people who'd probably mocked her for years, now standing firm. The sheriff looked at them, looked at the marshals, looked at the evidence spread across the table. His shoulders sagged. This isn't over, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Yes, it is, Crawford replied. It was over the moment Mrs. Henley dug up that evidence. You just didn't know it yet. Now leave, before I add your name to the list of people who'll be answering federal charges. The sheriff and his men rode off, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Martha stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. For 23 years, she'd been alone. Now she had an army. But Crawford's expression was grim. That bought us maybe 2 hours. Once the sheriff reports back to Coleman, things are going to escalate fast. Mrs. Henley, I need you to make copies of everything on that wall. Photographs aren't enough. We need sketches, transcripts, detailed notes.
If anything happens to the original, nothing's going to happen to it. You can't guarantee that. Coleman's desperate now. Desperate men do desperate things. As if summoning him by speaking his name, someone shouted from the road. Fire! There's a fire at the Coleman Ranch! Everyone turned. Sure enough, smoke was rising in the distance, thick and black, from the direction of Ezra Coleman's property. He's destroying evidence, Martha said. Whatever documents he kept at his ranch, he's burning them. Crawford swore under his breath. Tucker, take your men and get over there. Save what you can. But as Tucker and his marshals mounted up, another rider appeared. This one was covered in soot, his face streaked with ash. It's not just documents, the rider gasped. Coleman's burning everything. The barns, the outbuildings, even the main house. And he's inside it, won't come out. Says if he's going down, he's taking it all with him. Jesus Christ, Crawford breathed. He's trying to commit suicide. Or make it look like he is, Martha said quietly. While really, he's destroying the last physical evidence connecting him to the crimes. Either way, we need to stop him. Crawford turned to the crowd. Anyone here know Coleman's property well enough to guide us? Harold Sims stepped forward. I shod horses at his ranch for 15 years. I know every building, every room. But if he set the whole place ablaze, then we go in fast and we go in smart. Let's move.
Half the crowd surged toward their wagons and horses, caught up in the drama. Martha started to follow, but Sarah grabbed her arm. "You can't go. If this is a trap, then Crawford needs to know about it. I'm the only one who knows how Ezra thinks, how he plans. Martha, I've been fighting this man for 23 years. I'm not stopping now." They rode together, Martha and Sarah, in Widow Crane's wagon, following the smoke like a beacon. By the time they reached Coleman's ranch, the fire had consumed most of the outer buildings. The main house was ablaze from foundation to roof, flames licking out of every window. Crawford was arguing with Tucker at the property line. "We can't just let him burn. If he's really inside..." "If he's inside, he made his choice. I'm not sending men into that inferno for someone who said it himself." "What if he has more evidence in there? Documents that prove the governor's involvement, the San Francisco investors, all of it." "Then it's gone, and we work with what we have." Martha pushed past them, staring at the burning house. Something wasn't right. The fire was too even, too controlled. It looked like a fire meant to destroy a building, not kill someone inside it. "He's not in there," she said. "What?" "Ezra's not in that house. This is a distraction. He's running." Crawford's eyes widened. "Tucker, get men to the train station, the stage depot, every road out of town, now." But Martha was already moving, not toward the burning house, but toward the back of the property, where she remembered seeing a small cabin during one of her reconnaissance trips years ago. A cabin Ezra used for storage, for privacy, for secrets. Sarah followed her, stumbling over rough ground. "Where are you going?" "The one place no one thinks to look. The place where he'd actually keep his most damaging evidence, because it's too close to hide anything important." They found the cabin exactly where Martha remembered it. Small, nondescript, easy to overlook. The door was ajar. Martha pushed it open slowly, her heart hammering. Inside, Ezra Coleman sat at a small desk, methodically feeding papers into a pot-bellied stove. He looked up when they entered and smiled. "Martha, I wondered if you'd figure it out." "The house fire was a diversion." "Of course it was. Let them think I'm dead or running."
Either way, they're looking in the wrong place, while I finish what needs to be done. Destroying evidence. Protecting myself. There's a difference. He held up a document. "Do you know what this is?" "It's a signed statement from your husband, dated 2 days before his death. In it, he agrees to sell me the land for exactly the price I paid. His real signature, not a forgery." Martha's blood went cold. "That's impossible. He would never..." "Oh, he signed it. After I explained that if he didn't, terrible things might happen to his wife. He was trying to protect you, Martha, trying to save you from me. And then he had second thoughts, tried to back out, and well, accidents happen." The words hit Martha like physical blows. Her husband had signed, had tried to save her, had died because he'd changed his mind. "You're lying." "Am I? Look at it. The signature's genuine. Any expert will confirm it. Which means I didn't steal his land. He sold it to me."
Under duress, sure, but that's impossible to prove 23 years later.
This document alone dismantles your entire case. He tossed it into the stove. The paper caught, curled, blackened. Sarah lunged forward, trying to grab it, but Ezra pulled a pistol from his desk drawer and aimed it at her chest. "Don't." Sarah froze. "You're going to shoot us?" Martha asked, her voice strangely calm. "If I have to. But I'd rather not. Killing you now would just confirm everything you've been saying about me. Better if you live, keep making your accusations, and I produce evidence that your husband willingly sold me the land. It makes you look insane, obsessed, tragic. Except you just burned the evidence." "I burned one copy. I have others.
hidden in places even federal investigators won't find. Ezra stood, keeping the gun trained on them. You thought you were so clever, Martha, building your wall, documenting everything. But you missed the most important piece.
The one thing that would have proven I forced your husband's hand, and now it's gone. Is it? Martha's voice was cold. Because my husband kept journals, daily journals, and in those journals, he wrote about you threatening him, about the meeting where you showed him that document and told him to sign or watch me die. He wrote it all down, Ezra, every word. Ezra's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Am I? His journals are in that waterproof box I buried. The one Crawford's examining right now. The one you didn't know existed because you were too arrogant to think my husband might have documented his own murder. For the first time, Ezra looked uncertain. If such journals existed, you would have mentioned them before. I would have, except I didn't realize they were evidence until you just confirmed what I suspected. That you threatened him. That you forced him to sign. Now I know exactly which journal entries to point Crawford toward. It was a lie. Martha's husband had kept journals, but they'd burned in the fire along with everything else. But Ezra didn't know that, and in his moment of doubt, Sarah moved. She grabbed a heavy ledger from the desk and swung it at Ezra's gun hand. The weapon discharged, the bullet punching through the ceiling, and then Sarah was on him, fighting with a fury Martha had never seen from her before. Martha grabbed the poker from beside the stove and brought it down on Ezra's wrist. He screamed, the gun clattering to the floor, and Sarah kicked it away. You don't get to win, Sarah panted, pinning him against the desk. You don't get to destroy evidence and walk away. Not this time. Footsteps pounded outside. Crawford and Tucker burst through the door, weapons drawn, and stopped short at the sight before them. Ladies, Crawford said slowly, would you mind explaining what's happening here? Ezra Coleman was destroying evidence, Martha said, including documents proving he coerced my husband into signing a land transfer under threat of death. She's lying, Ezra snarled. She attacked me. This is assault. Is it? Tucker looked at the gun on the floor, at the powder burns on the ceiling, at Ezra's wrist already swelling from Martha's strike. Looks more like self-defense to me. What documents? Crawford was already searching the cabin, pulling open drawers, examining papers. He burned them, Sarah said. Put them in the stove. Crawford moved to the stove, carefully extracting the half-burned remains with a pair of tongs. Some of this is still legible, and if Mrs. Henley's husband kept journals as she claims. He didn't, Ezra spat. She's making it up. There are no journals. Then you have nothing to worry about, do you? Crawford said mildly. We'll just search the evidence box thoroughly and see what we find. Martha met Sarah's eyes. The girl gave her the tiniest nod. They both knew the journals didn't exist, but they also knew that Ezra's reaction had already convicted him. His desperation, his panic, his immediate certainty that such journals would destroy him. Crawford saw it too. Mr. Coleman, you're under arrest for the murder of James Henley, conspiracy to commit fraud, destruction of federal evidence, and assault with a deadly weapon. You have the right to— This isn't over, Ezra interrupted. I have lawyers, resources, connections all the way to Washington. You think you can destroy me with hearsay and burned papers? I'll bury you. All of you. Maybe, Crawford agreed, but you'll do it from a federal cell. Take him. As Tucker and his marshals hauled Ezra away, still shouting threats, Crawford turned to Martha. Did your husband really keep journals? No. They burned with the house. So you lied. I did what I had to do, same as I've been doing for 23 years. Crawford studied her for a long moment, then smiled grimly. Mrs. Henley, you'd make a hell of a federal investigator. Ever consider a career change? I'm 47 years old, and I've spent half my life building a wall.
I think I'll stick to what I know. Fair enough. But you should know, what you did today, what you've been doing all these years, it's going to change things. Not just for Ezra Coleman, for everyone involved in this conspiracy. The governor, the investors, the corrupt officials. They're all going to fall because you refuse to let one murder go unpunished. Good. Martha felt the weight of 23 years suddenly lift from her shoulders. Maybe then my husband's death will finally mean something. They walked back to the main property together, leaving the burning house and the captured criminal behind. The crowd was waiting, and when they saw Ezra Coleman in chains, a cheer went up that could probably be heard 3 counties over. But Martha didn't join in. She went to her wall, pressed her hand against log number 1, and whispered, "It's done. Finally, it's done." Sarah stood beside her. What happens now? Now we wait for the trial. Now we testify. Now we watch justice actually work the way it's supposed to. And after? Martha looked at the wall, her life's work, her obsession, her monument to grief and determination. After, I think I finally start living again. Thomas Brennan approached slowly, hesitantly. "Sarah, can we talk?" Sarah's jaw set. "There's nothing to talk about." "Please, just 5 minutes." Martha touched Sarah's arm. "Go, hear him out. You don't owe him forgiveness, but you owe yourself closure." Sarah nodded reluctantly and walked away with her husband. Martha watched them go, then turned to find Dorothy Chen waiting with her camera. "One more photograph?" Dorothy asked. "Of you and the wall. For the record." "For the record," Martha agreed. Dorothy positioned her, adjusted her camera, and in the moment before the flash, Martha allowed herself to smile. A real smile. The first one in 23 years. The photograph would show a tired woman standing in front of a wall made of firewood, each piece carved with numbers and words. But it would also show something else. Pride, strength, victory. Inspector Crawford was already organizing the evidence for transport to Helena. The trial would take months, maybe years. There would be appeals, delays, attempts to discredit Martha's testimony. But none of that mattered anymore, because the truth was out. The wall had spoken. And nobody in Montana Territory would ever forget the widow who turned firewood into justice. The trial began 6 weeks later in Helena, in a courtroom packed so tight people stood 3 deep against the walls. Martha sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, watching as Ezra Coleman was led in, wearing prison clothes instead of his expensive suits. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, but his eyes still held that cold calculation she remembered. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison Wells." The courtroom stood. Judge Wells was a federal appointee from back east, brought in specifically because every judge in Montana Territory had some connection to the case. He was 70 if he was a day, with white hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Be seated. We're here for the matter of United States versus Ezra Coleman. Murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice. Mr. Coleman, how do you plead?" Ezra's lawyer stood, a slick man from San Francisco, who probably cost more per hour than Martha had earned in a year. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor." "So noted. Prosecution, you may begin." The federal prosecutor was a woman named Catherine Morrison, sharp as a razor and twice as cutting. She laid out the case methodically, piece by piece, building the narrative of Ezra's crimes like she was constructing her own wall. "The evidence will show that Ezra Coleman, motivated by greed,
orchestrated the murder of James Henley to acquire land containing valuable mineral deposits. He coerced Mr. Henley into signing a transfer document under threat of death, then had his employee, Robert Finch, set fire to the Henley home to ensure James Henley couldn't recant. When Martha Henley survived, Coleman spent 23 years using his power and influence to silence anyone who might expose his crime. The defense attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Wells overruled him every time. The evidence was too strong, too documented, too meticulously preserved. Martha was the first witness called. Mrs. Henley, can you tell the court what happened on the night of August 12, 1868? Martha took a breath and began. She told them everything. The fire, her husband's death, Ezra's suspicious behavior at the funeral, the land transfer that appeared 3 months later, the decades of investigation that followed. And why didn't you report your suspicions to local authorities? Because the local authorities worked for Ezra Coleman. The sheriff is his brother-in-law. The judges took his money. The land office clerk was on his payroll. Who was I supposed to report it to? So you spent 23 years building your own case. I did what I had to do to survive and seek justice. The defense attorney tried to shake her on cross-examination, tried to paint her as obsessed, delusional, vengeful. But Martha had lived with these accusations for 2 decades. They didn't touch her anymore. Mrs. Henley, isn't it true that you have no actual proof my client murdered your husband? Just speculation and coincidence? I have Robert Finch's deathbed confession, signed and notarized. A confession from a dead man who can't be cross-examined? I have financial records showing your client paid Finch $50 the week before my husband died. I have testimony from 12 witnesses who saw suspicious activity. I have the forged signatures on the land transfer. You have a lot of circumstantial evidence and an unhealthy obsession. That's not the same as proof. Martha leaned forward. I have 23 years of documentation that your client has spent 23 years trying to destroy. If he's innocent, why did he burn the church and town hall to eliminate land records? Why did he try to have my property condemned to destroy my evidence? Why did he fire a gun at me and Sarah Brennan when we caught him burning documents in his cabin? The courtroom erupted. Judge Wells slammed his gavel. Mrs. Henley, please limit yourself to answering the question asked. I did answer it. The proof is in his behavior. Innocent men don't spend 2 decades covering their tracks. When Martha stepped down, Sarah was waiting outside the courtroom. You were incredible in there. I was honest. That's all I've ever been. Thomas left. Martha turned. What? This morning, he packed his things and left town. Said he couldn't watch the trial. Said seeing what Ezra Coleman had become was too much like looking in a mirror. Did he ask you to go with him? He did. I said no. Sarah's voice was steady now, sure. He's trying to change, I think, trying to be better. But that's his journey, not mine. I spent too many years being who he wanted me to be. I need to figure out who I am without him. And who's that? Sarah smiled. I don't know yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out. The trial continued for 3 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding another nail to Ezra Coleman's coffin. The former land office clerk who'd been paid to file the forged deed. The lawyer who'd notarized false signatures. The ranch hand who'd seen Finch with lamp oil the night of the fire. But the most damaging testimony came from someone Martha had never expected. The prosecution calls Governor Jonathan Potts. The courtroom went silent. The territorial governor climbed slowly to the stand, his face gray. Governor Potts, did you have a business relationship with Ezra Coleman? I refuse to answer, on the grounds that it may incriminate me. Let me rephrase. Did you authorize mining permits for land owned by Ezra Coleman in exchange for financial compensation? I refuse to answer. Did you receive payments totaling $50,000 from Coleman and his San Francisco investors between 1869 and 1891? I refuse to answer. Judge Wells leaned forward. Governor Potts, you're under oath. Answer the question or I'll hold you in contempt. Potts looked at Ezra, at the jury, at the packed courtroom. Then he sagged. Yes, I authorized the permits. I took the money. Coleman said the land was legally acquired and I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to know the answers. The courtroom exploded. Martha felt Sarah grip her hand, squeezing tight. And when you learn that Coleman may have obtained the land through murder? I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just rumors. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. Yet you did nothing. I did nothing. The prosecution turned to the jury. You've heard it directly from the governor himself. This wasn't just murder. This was a conspiracy of silence that reached the highest levels of territorial government. And it would still be happening if not for one woman who refused to stop seeking the truth. The defense tried to salvage something in their closing arguments, but it was hopeless. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. We, the jury, find the defendant Ezra Coleman guilty on all counts. Martha felt something break open inside her chest. Not grief, not triumph, just release. 23 years of carrying the weight, and suddenly it was gone. Ezra was sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Governor Potts resigned and faced his own charges. The San Francisco investors were indicted. The corrupt judges and officials were removed from office. But the biggest surprise came 3 days after the verdict, when Inspector Crawford appeared at the boarding house where Martha and Sarah were staying. Mrs. Henley, I have news. More charges? No, something else. The federal government has completed its review of the original land transfer. Since it was obtained through fraud and murder, it's being voided. The land is reverting to its rightful owner. Martha's breath caught. Me? You, along with all mineral rights, which, as I mentioned, are worth a considerable sum. Conservative estimates put the copper deposits at over $300,000 in value. The number was incomprehensible. Martha had been living on pennies for 23 years. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it wisely. And Mrs. Henley, there's more. The territorial legislature is establishing a victims' compensation fund, and you're the first recipient. They're awarding you $50,000 for the years of hardship you endured because the system failed you. Sarah let out a laugh that was half sob. Martha, you're rich. I'm compensated. There's a difference. But Martha felt tears starting, the first real tears she'd shed since the night of the fire. All I wanted was justice for my husband. I never expected. Justice sometimes comes with restitution. Crawford handed her an envelope. This is the deed to your land. The original deed, properly registered. It's yours again. All of it. After Crawford left, Martha sat with the deed in her hands, staring at her husband's signature. James Henley. Dead 23 years, but still present in the careful loops of his handwriting. What are you going to do with all that money? Sarah asked. I'm going to rebuild. Not just the house. Everything. The life I put on hold when James died. The future I stopped believing in. And the wall? Martha thought about her wall, her monument to grief and determination. I'm going to preserve it, maybe donate it to a museum so people remember that one person refusing to give up can change everything.
But Sarah, I'm not living next to it anymore. I'm done making my home in the past. 6 months later, Martha stood in front of a new house built on her reclaimed land. Not fancy, but solid. Real.
A place where memories could be made instead of mourned. Sarah lived there too, in a room of her own, working as Martha's business manager. The copper mine was producing, the money was coming in, and Martha had established a foundation to help other women who'd been failed by the justice system. "Another letter from Thomas," Sarah said one morning, holding up an envelope. "Are you going to read it?" "Eventually, maybe. He writes every week, telling me about the changes he's making, the therapy he's in, the amends he's trying to make. I think he really is trying to become a better person." "Does that change anything for you?" "No, because even if he changes completely, I've changed too. I'm not the woman who married him. I'm not even the woman who showed up at your property last year. I'm someone new, someone I actually like." Martha smiled. "Good. You should like who you are. Took me 23 years to learn that lesson." The doorbell rang. It was Reverend Carson, along with Mrs. Patterson, Henry Whitmore, and Dorothy Chen. "We brought lunch," Mrs. Patterson announced, carrying a basket. "Figured you two needed feeding." "We're fine." "Nonsense! You've been working too hard. Both of you." Dorothy was already setting up on the porch. "Besides, we have news." "What news?" Henry grinned. "The territorial legislature voted this morning. Montana's becoming a state. And they're naming the new victim compensation program after you. The Martha Henley Justice Initiative." Martha sat down hard. "They're naming it after me?" "You changed everything, Martha. The corruption investigation you sparked has cleaned out half the government. People who thought they were untouchable are in prison, and victims who thought they'd never see justice are finally getting their day in court. You did that. We all did that. Every person who stood up when it mattered." "But you stood up first," Reverend Carson said quietly. "For 23 years, you stood alone. That takes a kind of courage most people never find." They ate lunch together, this unlikely group of friends who'd found each other through crisis and stayed together through choice. And as Martha listened to them talk and laugh, she realized something profound. She'd spent 23 years building a wall to document the past. Now she was building a life to embrace the future. And somehow, impossibly, the second felt more important than the first. That evening, after everyone left, Martha and Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the land that had cost so much and meant so much. "Do you think about him?" Sarah asked. "Your husband?" "Every day, but differently now. Before, I thought about what was taken from me. Now I think about what he gave me. 23 years of purpose, the strength to never give up, the proof that one person really can make a difference." "Do you think he'd be proud?" Martha considered this. "I think he'd be shocked I turned Firewood into a federal corruption investigation. But yes, I think he'd be proud. And I think he'd be happy I finally let myself live again." "What about you? Are you happy?" The question caught Martha off guard. Happiness wasn't something she'd thought about in decades. It seemed frivolous compared to justice, truth, survival. But looking at Sarah, at the new house, at the land she'd reclaimed and the life she was rebuilding, Martha realized the answer was yes. "I'm getting there," she said. "For the first time in 23 years, I'm actually getting there." A year after the trial, Martha received an invitation to speak at the new state capitol. They were dedicating a memorial to victims of corruption and wanted her to say a few words. She almost declined. Public speaking wasn't her strength, and she'd spent so many years being ignored that being listened to felt uncomfortable. But Sarah convinced her. "These people need to hear your story. Not the version in the newspapers. The real story. What it cost. What it took. Why it mattered. So Martha stood in front of 300 people and told them the truth. I spent 23 years of my life building a wall out of firewood. People thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But that wall documented something important. It proved that powerful people aren't untouchable, that corruption can be exposed, that one person refusing to accept injustice can spark real change. She paused, looking out at the crowd. But here's what I learned. The wall wasn't the point. Justice was the point. Truth was the point. And sometimes, seeking those things requires you to do something that looks insane to everyone else. You carve numbers into firewood. You refuse to move on. You spend decades collecting evidence that most people would dismiss. The people who laughed at my dilapidated walls, who mocked my use of firewood, they didn't understand what they were seeing. They saw kindling. I saw documentation. They saw a crazy widow. I saw someone who refused to let murder go unpunished. And in the end, when they finally looked closely at what I'd built, they realized the joke was never on me. It was on everyone who thought justice could be bought, truth could be buried, and one determined woman could be silenced. The crowd erupted in applause. Martha stepped down, her hands shaking, and found Sarah waiting with tears streaming down her face. "That was perfect," Sarah whispered. "Absolutely perfect." 2 years after the trial, on the anniversary of James Henley's death, Martha stood at his grave with fresh flowers. She did this every year, but this time was different. "I finally did it," she told the headstone. 25 years, but I did it. Ezra Coleman's in prison. The land's back in our family. And James, I'm living again. Really living. I have a home. I have friends. I have purpose beyond revenge." She knelt, touching the stone. "I'm going to stop coming here so often. Not because I'm forgetting you, but because I'm finally ready to let you rest. You've been waiting 25 years for me to live the life you wanted me to have. I think it's time I actually did that." Sarah appeared beside her, laying her own flowers on the grave. "He'd be proud of you," she said, "of everything you became." "I became what I had to be, but now I get to become what I want to be. That's the real victory." They walked back to the wagon together, two women who'd found strength in each other when the world tried to break them both. 5 years after the trial, Martha Henley died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 52. She left her fortune to the Justice Initiative, her land to Sarah Brennan, and her wall to the Montana Historical Society, with instructions that it be preserved exactly as she'd built it. Sarah kept the house, continued Martha's work, and eventually married a kind man who treated her with the respect she deserved. She named her first daughter Martha. The wall stands in the State Museum to this day, each log carefully preserved, each number still visible, each carved word still legible. Visitors come from all over to see it, to read the story written in firewood, to understand that justice isn't something granted, it's something fought for, carved out, documented piece by piece until the evidence becomes undeniable. And when people ask why Martha Henley spent 23 years building a wall instead of moving on with her life, the museum guides tell them the truth. She wasn't building a wall. She was building a case. She wasn't carving firewood. She was carving history. And when everyone laughed at the widow's dilapidated hut walls, they didn't realize they were watching one woman dismantle an empire of corruption, one numbered log at a time.
proving that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be persistent, documented, and absolutely impossible to ignore.